Welcome into the Alabama Bass Trail Podcast presented by Phoenix Boats. I'm Kay Donaldson, the director of the Alabama Bass Trail and the host for this week's podcast. You know, Normally post season wrap up, last tournament of the season, so on and so forth, I really struggle with what content we're going to bring to the Alabama Bass Trail Podcast. Apologize. I was going to go ahead and cut these down for just a minute because they will be ringing. I struggle with that. What content do you guys want to hear? And I've asked for your suggestions many times, and I've got a couple of people that said, "Hey, I want you to interview so and so," and we've tried to do that. But I really struggle with what content to bring y'all. But one thing that comes up every year, throughout the season, in the off season, it comes up over and over and over. So this topic is not one that I've really struggled with. I've talked about it before on this podcast myself, but I've never really brought someone on here to talk about it. So I am going to bring on someone that I feel like is pretty much an expert on this topic. I try to talk about things that I know about and the information that I've investigated or I've researched. But I felt like that this topic is important enough. Um, it is uber important to bass fishermen as well as crappie fishermen and the cities and our partners and everything. So I wanted to make sure that I brought someone on here that I feel really confident and comfortable with in talking about the subject on stocking. And I have gone to a number of different conventions and meetings discussing this topic. I actually took Scott Canterbury, Clint Davis with me a couple years ago. We went down to Montgomery and met with Department of Conservation Natural Resources, their biologists. We took our years and years and years of bait data that we submit to the state. You hear me talk about that bait data every tournament that we do, and it's very important to me. And it is one of the first thing John does when he comes off the stage. Um, when he gets back home, he sits down and he goes through that bait data that we collect on our tournament computer, and he creates that report that we submit to the state after every event. I've said it time and time and time again that tournament organizations should be complying with that. They should be submitting that to the state, and I hope that they do that, and I hope all states are doing that. We have worked with the Department of Conservation on a couple of different studies, whether it be gill sampling. We've just recently worked on a study with them at Neely Henry to where we provide a sampling of the bass that we have at our tournaments. We've worked with them on a couple of different studies, and we're going to be getting the results of that Neely Henry study fairly soon. And hopefully, I'll be given some information that I can bring back and share on the podcast. But one of the things that's often talked about, and it's been a frustration among a lot of Alabama anglers, is stocking. I don't always agree with what some of the anglers say, and I've made that very clear and evident. I don't think every lake can be painted with a broad brush. They don't all adhere the same way. Lake Martin, prime example. Logan Martin, prime example. Stocked full of fish. You're going to catch thousands of pound and a half bass there. Um, which says stocking is not an issue. Maybe its food source is an issue, that those fish are not growing at the rate that they should. Um, it is not an issue of putting more bass in that lake is gonna make that lake better, and, that seems to be the overall consensus when you talk to bass fishermen is we need to put more bass in the lake, and, we're gonna talk to a gentleman named Stephen Wisdom. I will preface that by saying Stephen is a former Alabama Bass Trail angler. I believe he has fished both the North and the South, so just kinda giving you a heads up there. He is a former bass fisherman. He's fished the opens, he's fished so he's been around the country. The company that he works for is Red Hills Fishery, and their website is www.titanbass.com, Titan bass.com. So we're going to have Stephen on. He's going to talk a lot about the genetics that they're working with and why it is important to really concentrate on the genetics of the bass that you're stocking, whether you're doing a private pond or a lake. We're going to talk about some of the clients that he's worked with his company, and see how far down the line they are with some of those stocking programs to see what results they're seeing, and get his educated response to some of these questions. What are the advantages of doing that? We've heard the conservation director at BASS say that stocking is not the savior for lakes. We're often compared to Texas and what the ShareLunker program does, understanding they are stocking genetics. They are breeding trophy bass. They are not just going out there and throwing a bunch of F1 bass in a lake. They are stocking genetics. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. It's not going to be what a lot of you want to hear, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to take a lot of hate from this podcast. But just saying that you're going to spend $10 an angler and go stock a lake is not necessarily the answer that we're looking for. And we're going to ask the question is, could that be harmful? Could past stocking efforts be harmful to um, to the lakes? So we're going to ask a professional, someone who works in this business every day, all day. He's not working to just make a dollar for his company. He's a fisherman. He has a vested interest in the success of lakes throughout the United States, not just in the great state of Alabama. So we're going to talk with him next on the Alabama Bass Trail podcast. His name is Stephen Wisdom. Again, he is a former Alabama Bass Trail angler, and I can't wait to have him on here with you. I can't wait to talk all things genetics in bass, and also find out some of the great work they're doing throughout the United States. So we'll be back in just a moment, but you're listening to the Alabama Bass Trail podcast presented by Phoenix Boats. You're going to want to stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Research and development is more than just time in the shop for us. It's time out here, sweating the details, making boats that work as well in the real world as they do on paper. From our R&D team to our anglers on the water, we have the knowledge and passion to build you the finest fishing platform in the world.
Welcome back to the Alabama Bass Trail podcast presented by Phoenix Boats. And as I promised, Mr. Stephen Wisdom with Titan Bass, I think Red Hills Fishery with us, former Alabama Bass Trail guy. So am I right that you fish the North and the South?
I did. Right when you started, I was still very much into competitive fishing, but I was in a transition in my life with my family, and I'd started a business in the hunting industry that traveling around the country in the opens, like a lot of guys, just wasn't as feasible anymore. So when you launched the Alabama Bass Trail, I was like, this is perfect, because I was still all in. Like, I want to fish a lot. I want to fish as much as possible. And so for the first couple years, I think 4 years, I fished both the North and the South Trail. I think 1 year I fished the South Trail because, to be honest, the North Trail is probably one of the hardest fish trails in the world. I mean, the guys that fish that are from that area are just, as you know, and as everybody knows, they're phenomenal fishermen. And for a guy who kind of lives not around those lakes, not spending the time, it was very difficult to compete with those guys. So 1 year I tried just the South, but they were just as good. And then my family, my career, my kids got older with sports. It just kind of I transitioned out of competitive fishing and into really just some other worlds that still are in the outdoor industry, still are in fishing. But yeah, there for a while I was fishing, I think, all of your tournaments, all over the state. So it was a lot of fun. Now my son's 14 and he's begging me to like get back into it. Like, come on, Dad, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Oh,
So
that hurts my heart.
we're trying to figure out a way to get back into competitive fishing, but this time with my son. So
I cannot believe you just said he is 14 years old.
yeah, it's crazy.
Oh
It's
my
crazy that my oldest son
gosh.
is 14 now.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh, that's
Like,
crazy.
because it is because a lot of the pictures I have from back in the day with the Alabama Bass Trail, I mean, they're tiny. All my kids are tiny in those pictures.
Yeah.
Um, but time flies, and my career has really taking a lot of different roads, and you look up and you're like, wow, cannot believe that much time has passed, because it feels like yesterday. I mean, it
Yeah.
feels, I can still remember, like, Neely Henry Lake, me and my partner had a really cool, crazy day, and we stumbled on a spot. We got our boat stuck, like the typical story where it's, Neely Henry's super shallow and we're way back in. We're stuck. And I'm out in the water trying to figure out how to get the boat off of this little rock pile. And my partner starts catching fish, I mean big ones. And we go back there, and the next morning, and on this there's one little rock pile that, I mean, I'm talking about, it wasn't more than a foot and a half deep, but it was rocks, and there was some fish there. We ended up catching, I think, 16 or 17 pounds. And I mean, that was the better part of 8, 9 years ago, and it feels like yesterday. So time definitely flies.
It
And yes, I have
does.
a 14-year-old, and I have a
Gosh.
14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old, and it's crazy because just the other day they were all little bitty guys. I carry both of them in my hands, and
Yeah.
now he's not as tall as me yet, but it's probably not 6 months away. He'll blow past me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I say this all the time, watching families grow through the Alabama Bass Trail and being able to just sit back and see that. And gosh, I didn't realize. We're going into our 12th season, so it all makes sense when you think about it like that. But
Mhm.
it almost seems like just a year ago. I mean, it really
Yeah.
does. But well,
Yep.
I've talked to you several times. You and I've been able to be in certain places at the same time, and we've talked about the company, Red Hills Fishery. Talked about TitanBass.com. I want to talk about that a little bit because, as I mentioned to you off air, it is something that comes up throughout the year, especially during that really heavy fishing time. I would say February to May, maybe, when we're in that spawning time, and fishing is just, there's a tournament like every day, and there's a big
Yeah.
tournament every weekend, and we
Right.
talk about the mortality of the bass through tournament fishing and things like that. But I want to talk about stocking. It is a hot button issue, and I don't always agree with people when it comes to that. And I try to explain why I'm not in favor
Mhm.
of certain things. But people always refer to the good old days when Mark's Outdoors would take thousands of bass and put them in the lake during their tournament, and how great the fishing was then and all of that. So I just want to talk about some of that, but mainly more or less what you do with your company and some of the successes that you guys have seen. So talk a little
Yeah,
bit about Red Hills Fishery and what Titan Bass is.
yeah, absolutely. So Red Hills is obviously the fishery, and Titan Bass is really our branded term when it comes to pedigree breeding. So I always like to draw the parallel because we're familiar with it, especially in the South. It'd be like breeding deer or breeding, Labradors, horses, even cows, where you study the family and you study parents and what their offspring produce, and then you repeat that. Well, Red Hills is the only hatchery in the world who does that with largemouth bass, and so it is the word Titan is really uh, refers to pedigree breeding of largemouth bass. So genetically, so a lot of times people talk about, they draw a parallel to the Texas ShareLunker program, and great program out there. They're doing a lot of really cool stuff, but it's selective breeding, and the difference is between pedigree and selective is you're looking at two fish and say, hey, those two fish are big, let's spawn them and their kids will be big. Well, that's true. It works a lot, but we all know, just like for humans, sometimes two tall people have a short kid. So, because there's a recessive gene in there that you're not aware of. So selective breeding works, but it's not scientific because it's not truly repeatable. Whereas Red Hills is looking at the genome type. So, if you think about generically, or, growing up, the helix, the cross helix you see, and, if you think back to, like, Jurassic Park, and, they, in some of those images, it's looking at that helix and looking at all those genotypes that are stacking and understanding what's going on inside the fish versus just what's outside the fish. So that's what we're focused on at Red Hills, is a truly genetic breeding program of largemouth bass. And that's all we do. We don't we get all asked all the time, do you have this? No, we're, at the end of the day, Red Hills is a genetics company. Our medium, what we produce, is largemouth bass. So all things genetics, understanding what genetic markers represent, like trophy fish. Everybody wants to grow big, giant fish, double-digit fish. Well, how do you know what that is genetically? And part of our research, which we'll get into in a little bit, has revealed what a true trophy fish looks like from a genetic standpoint and how we can repeat that. Also looking at the genetic potential of faster growing fish, or even we spend a lot of time looking at gender. So, if you want more bigger fish, then the biggest fish is going to be the female. So how to identify gender quicker or more predictable. And so there's just these different layers that we've studied from genetics, and to try to ultimately build, the holy grail largemouth bass. And we've done that in multiple layers. So it's not just a fish. And that's what I want to make sure that I make sure the audience understands. Like, one, this is not genetic modification, right? This is just understanding genetics and what to do with them and how to use them and where to go with them. We still, so for example, most people in the fish world know that there's a northern bass, there's a Florida bass, and then there's a hybrid bass, and then there's some other smaller subspecies like the Guadalupe, the shoal bass, and all that. We won't get into that. We're focused on the black bass species in those main top categories of a northern bass, a Florida bass, and then a hybrid bass is just putting the two together. And so we have northern Titans, we have Florida Titans, we have hybrid Titans, and we also have what we call Titan Max, which again is the Titan Max is a Florida bass that has known trophy DNA in it. But again, we'll get into that. So Red Hills Fishery is just mainly a largemouth bass fishery that is focusing on understanding to the full the genetic side of largemouth bass and how to understand, utilize those, and create better fish. I always like to draw the analogy of an Alabama or an Auburn defensive line football player, right? They're all the 5 stars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking for the 4 and 5 star fish and reproducing 4 or 5 star fish on a controllable, repeatable basis, and not really paying any attention to the 1 and 2 stars, and
Okay.
actually kind of getting them out of the stock, getting them out of our facility, or even around where they can get slid back in. So again, it's selection, but it's genetic selection of what's inside the fish.
Okay, so you're doing this mainly in a controlled environment, because I know that's one of the questions that always comes up is a lot of your testing and a lot of that all goes on in a controlled environment. So when you open that up to a non-controlled environment, and we'll just throw out a lake, Lay Lake. You've worked with other states around the state of Alabama. How do you conduct those type genetic tests, and how do you monitor how your fish are doing in those uncontrollable environments?
Yeah, so I'll parallel that in 2 ways. So 2 things that happen in a natural environment. So the cool thing about what we do at Red Hills, and it being a controlled environment, it has to be a controlled environment for it to be scientific, period. And that's what we've built with our hatchery. It's all indoors, all repeatable. The water filtration that we use is really unbelievable. And because you got to have that repeatable cycle. But because everything's controlled, we know everything about our fish. We know we can look at a genetic profile later and say, hey, that's a Titan bass DNA wise, or that has some Titan parentage in it. So when you go into the wild, a couple things happen. One, a lot of smaller subsets can be tracked from tagging, and going back and scanning. But really, understanding that the number one goal is not necessarily to be able to track Titan bass. Think about it this way: Titan bass, and implementing Titan bass into a wild system or a free flowing system is like taking a glass of water and dropping red dye in it. So when you start to drop red dye in water, at first the water doesn't change. But as you continue to drop red dye, that water will continue to change, to turn pink, and then eventually red. Well, that's genetic confusion. So in a wild environment, our number one goal is genetic infusion. So when it comes to this argument of supplemental stocking and adding stocking, you're right. It's all over the board. Where our focus is it's just genetic infusion. So the more quality genetics that I put into a lake over and over again, you have that fish who I can prove to you is a 5-star fish or a 4-star fish, just genetically. Well, then it spawns with a native fish. Well, that native fish's kids got part of the 5-star in them and part of the native fish in them. And
Mhm.
you're just improving the overall genetics in a facility so that you go back and so the second layer of this is you can go back and run a DNA test on any given body of water, any given population of fish. And that's the really cool part about what we've discovered through our research is now we not only know what's going on, but we've built a test kit that I could go, like, we could go to Neely Henry Lake right now and take a subsample of fish, let's just say, however many you want in any given region of the lake. And I can tell you everything about what's going on in that population of fish from their purity standpoint, from their relationship standpoint. So, how related are the fish? So, long term sustainability in a healthy fishery, you need genetic diversity. You don't need, for lack of better terms, you don't want a bunch of brothers and sisters and cousins swimming around, right? And we can see that. We can see that there's no diversity in the families. All these fish have just been spawning with each other over and over again, and that's a problem. And then we can also look at the fish and say, you know what, this lake claims to be a trophy fishery, or we want to increase our trophy fishery possibility in this lake, but there are no trophy DNA markers popping up on any test. So you need to pump in some trophy DNA into this lake. So that's how we like people to try to understand when we start working with state agencies, we start working with public bodies of water. The goal is not just supplemental stocking. The goal is to find out what's going on and then address the problem, right? So again, let's just say, let's go to Gunnersville, right? Like, let's go to a section of Gunnersville that historically has a lot of trophy fish, and we've got this one creek that, man, we used to catch giants in here, and we don't catch giants anymore. What's going on? We could run a DNA test in there with the population of fish and see, well, man, there's no trophy markers in this lake or in this section of the lake. Let's dump some Titan Maxes in there. Not from the standpoint of supplemental stocking, from the standpoint of infusing a genetic profile into this section of the lake. Or over here, man, it seems like all these fish are stunted. This lake, all these fish are stunted. You used maybe Jordan or Neely Henry. You're missing that class of 4, 5, 6s. Everything's small. Well, there's two things that can happen there. One, it could just be a forage issue. Those fish don't have the right size food. But the other one could be you're losing your genetic versatility in any given area. Now, the Coosa River is a little bit challenging because, again, all of our work is done on largemouth bass, not spotted bass.
Spotted bass.
We're focused on largemouth bass. But if you take the largemouth bass population in Jordan and you're missing a class and all you got is a bunch of smaller fish, well, that could be because of the lack of genetic diversity in that area or on that lake. So you go in and you add new genetics. So it's not about adding more fish. It's about adding a genetic profile that's going to produce a better fish or give you a different profile of fish. And that's where you can kind of see the overall quality of your lake increase. So it's about genetic infusion when it comes to public bodies of water. Now, private bodies of water, we can really manipulate and control and do a lot of different things as well. But that's only part of Red Hills and the Titan Bass. And it's actually, I love that part, but it's actually the part that I love the idea of how do we help the greater good in what we're doing? How do we help navigate bodies of water and improve them over and over again throughout the years for sustainability, for increased size, for increased catchability? Some lakes are great. You go out there and fish all day and only catch 4 or 5 fish. Well, that's just as much of a problem as not catching big fish. And so I love that part of my job, is really trying to work with agencies and organizations, both private and public, to get them to see and understand what we can offer from just an improvement of a lake and a sustainability of a lake. And the cool thing about what we do is we have the technology to show you what's going on, and then we have the tools, our fish, to implement and apply to what we've identified as going on in the lake. Whether, hey, you want this to be a trophy fishery, but there's no trophy DNA, and you got a bunch of stunted fish, they're all related, let's get some diversity going, and on and on and on. So that's been the really cool part about what we've been able to offer from a state agency in a public body of water platform.
Well, let's talk about that. You've mentioned to me several years ago of different agencies that you're working with. What is one that you can talk about?
Yeah, I can talk about the state of Arkansas. For a lot of people don't know this yet, or they quickly are. The state of Arkansas has really gone full bore in implementing a trophy fishery program around their state. They are very bought into improving the fisheries around the state of Arkansas, and ultimately we've partnered with them in the genetic side of that and helping them not only build out and understand their current genetic profile around their state, especially south of I-40, because south of I-40 is a much higher Florida bass population and a successful Florida bass population. Because again, if you want true trophies, it's going to have a Florida gene in it. But states like Arkansas and Tennessee and throughout that region are always going to have a northern and a Florida population, and then some natural hybridization. So we're helping them understand and implement our Titan Max program, which is known trophy DNA in their fish, and then also helping them build broodstock that have that known trophy DNA, so that they can spawn fish in their facility. They're building a facility. They're about to finish it up, just like very similar to what we have, an indoor controllable hatchery, where you can spawn multiple times a year. That's the cool thing about Red Hills is we spawn about 8 months out of the year. So we're always making fish, and they'll kind of be able to do the same thing, but helping them build a broodstock that can truly be producing offspring or fingerlings that have great DNA in them, that they know have great DNA. Because for years and for decades, a lot of states have hatcheries and they're producing millions of bass fingerlings. But until now, they really don't know what they're producing other than potentially purity, that they know that this fish is pure. And actually, most hatcheries don't even have pure fish anymore. That's another thing that we're trying to help improve. But now we can go in and actually help them and show them what they are producing genetically and what they're putting into their fisheries genetically, to create some long-term sustainability and to help them achieve their goals. And Arkansas is just right now, in my opinion, even though I am an Alabamian, Arkansas, they are more gung ho about it than any other state right now. They really do want to change their fisheries, and they are putting their best foot forward right now. And it's been a great collaboration to date on just helping them from the understanding the genetics side of things. And again, that's both from helping them produce their own Titan bass and then also producing some Titan bass for them. Like just recently, Lake Monticello in Arkansas, they drained it, they started over, and just this past summer we stocked Titan Maxes in there, which again, Titan Maxes is our known trophy DNA fish. So, and they're doing another lake. The name of it slips my mind right now, but they're redoing lakes right now, but they're also building a whole hatchery program for it to be sustainable and be able to really pump those fish throughout the state, and really taking a lot of effort into just improving the overall black bass species fisheries in the state of Arkansas. So that's one that's really good. We're working with several others that I'm not at liberty to talk about at this point because it's just not far enough along in their public relations side. But there's four other states that we're doing some sort of work with them. Some states will never really probably build a true reproductive process where they're building fingerlings to do stocking. Some states just need better understanding of genetics and understanding of what they have.
Mhm.
And that's the other side of what we're helping is for the first time ever, we can come in and tell you what you have. And if you may have something great and you don't even know it, or you may really be putting out fish that are ultimately terrible and you
Mhm.
don't know it until now. Because before this genetics test kit that we built through our research, the only real thing you could do is send some fish samples off to Auburn University or out to our lab, and our genetics lab is in California, and know the purity of the fish. How pure is this? A pure Florida? Is this a pure northern? Or what level of hybridization? That's all you really could know. Well, man, now we can tell you a lot of stuff. We can tell you lineage. We can tell you relationships in the population. We can tell you trophy DNA markers. I mean, there's just so much that we can tell you now because of what we were trying to discover in our research. It gave us that tool, and now we can offer that tool to not only to agencies, but even to the what I call the do-it-yourselfers, the guy who has a 5-acre lake in the backyard. I mean, he can get that kit from us just like a state agency and figure out what's going on in his lake, and then we basically can help him with just real life genetic recommendations of your next step. And so those are kind of the two things we're working with states right now is helping them understand their genetics and then either helping them build a program or actually building fish for them.
How long would you say your relationship with Arkansas, how long have y'all been in that relationship with them?
Yeah, so Arkansas actually has like a 12-year black bass management plan out there. You can actually go out online and see it. It's very thorough, very impressive. So I think they're in year 2 or 3 of that management plan, and we kind of entered the picture about a year ago. So
Okay.
we started the conversation about a year and a half ago, but a year ago we really started getting a picture of how we could help them. And in the short term was stocking Lake Monticello with Titan Maxes. And I think that happened in May. So this time last year, we really engaged with them about what we're doing. And vice versa. They found out about us and they knew they were about to launch, they were about to finish up this new fish hatchery that they've built, and really wanted to understand the genetics, even more so than let's say what Texas is doing. Texas
Mhm.
has a big robust system, but it's a different system, and Arkansas really was wanting to focus more on the genetic side of things.
All right. Um, the thing that sticks in my mind is one thing you said they drained Lake Monticello and they're starting from scratch. Is that necessary? Because I mean, the opportunity of draining Lake Gunnersville is just not an opportunity. I mean, that's not never going to happen. So, how do you go into a body of water that is not going to be drained, and can you do that and still see all of the information that you're going to need to maybe improve the genetics in that body?
Yeah, so my answer is probably controversial in a way that there's always going to be state agencies and fisheries directors that have their own opinion and their own focus, and I get it. And in full transparency, I am not the biologist in our group. I am the business development guy, but I'm passionate about this, and I've by default in the last 4 years probably become as much of a knowledgeable biologist than actually, than having my fishery biologist degree. And so I run into a lot of different people who have different views on it. But I go back to a more a practical, logical a way to think about it. My glass of water with my red dye.
Mhm.
And the reality is, if I put a couple drops of red dye in Lake Gunnersville, you won't know it's there. But the reality is, it's there. Genetically, it's there. And in genetics, it's reproducing itself over and over again. So the more red drops I put in there, the redder the water gets. And over time, the water will continue to get more red because these fish are spawning over and over. So you're spreading a germ, right? You're spreading a
Right.
disease. But this is good. You're spreading genetics through reproduction. So you and practically speaking, you can make a difference. It's just how easy will it be to see it and feel it. And the beautiful thing I've always gone back to, you said this off camera about, well, is there a problem with Neely Henry Lake? Well, and a lot of times people say no, and a lot of times biologists say no, but you cannot lie or you cannot deny practical. Like, here is real life proof. I have 250 of the best fishermen in the state catching fish year in and year out, and here is the brass tacks. Here's the data. Here's what's not happening. And it's hard to really, if you want to look at it practically, to deny that. So you start seeing your fishery improve. Let's go back to about the time that Alabama Bass Trail started. Lake Chickamauga in Tennessee was just, it exploded, right?
Right.
It was a mud hole for all of my childhood, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden they're everywhere. Well, if you go back and look at the data, they stocked it. They started stocking it, and then they stopped stocking it. And you saw it go whoop, whoop. And so that practically worked, even though a lot of scientists and a lot of biologists would say, that didn't really work. But when you looked at fish and what was being caught, it worked. And when you stopped doing, it went back down. So again, understanding and trusting in the fact that when you're I'm not just adding a fish to the lake that's just going to be like the rest of the fish and they're just going to reproduce with the rest of the fish. We're adding a fish that it is a defensive lineman for Alabama, right? It's a dude. Genetically, it's a guy. Female or male. I'm speaking figuratively.
Right.
And it's going to reproduce, right? It's going to reproduce. And the cool thing about genetics is they're there for a lifetime. And a fish, if a fish is going to be a 20-pounder, it was going to be a 20-pounder when it was this big.
Right.
And that's we say, when you talk about that all the time in the hatchery, because people will come visit our hatchery and are like, well, where are all the 15-pound fish? And it's like, we don't use 15-pound fish. We don't need them because a 15-pounder's genetics, it's the same genetics when it's a 1-pounder.
Right.
And it's a lot easier to take care of and feed and keep alive 1 to 3 pounders than to keep alive a 15-pounder. Now, we've got some big fish in the building, but that's not our program. That's a selective breeding program. That's a program where you walk in and you want to see 13-pounders everywhere because you're spawning them. Well, we're not spawning 13-pounders. We're spawning fish that have a super high genetic profile. We're spawning Titan Maxes so right now there's 12 known trophy DNA in largemouth bass, and we're on the verge of discovering 5 more. So put it at 17. We're looking for fish that have as many of those 17 markers in them as possible. That's the fish we're spawning. And that fish, whether it's 5 pounds or 1 pound, is going to have those genetic markers. And so knowing that those fish all over the lake are swimming around, have the right DNA in them to produce better fish over and over again, every year they're spawning, you're going to be adding more red dye to the water, and you will begin to see a difference in a given area, especially like a Lake Guntersville. Yes, it's huge. It's giant. There's fish everywhere. But Lake Guntersville is very segmented in a beautiful way from, North Saudi to South Saudi to down in Browns Creek to Seabolt. It's beautifully segmented that you can change segments of that lake and it be trackable because of the way that lake splits off. And it's not just like a main lake system, or it's not just a big round bowl. And so I think you will see, just like a private fishery, if with the effort, knowing that we're adding genetics to the lake, those genetics are not going anywhere. They're only going to continue to reproduce over and over again. And the more you add, the redder the water gets, and you will begin to see a difference. And again, the cool thing is you can go back in and run genetic testing on a population of fish. And I can tell you, man, this fish got some good looking DNA in it. This fish got 12 trophy markers. And inevitably, the native fish on Lake Guntersville are probably pretty good from a trophy marker standpoint. We probably could find a lot of trophy markers in Guntersville. But how do you make it sustainable? How do you make it not so up and down? How do you improve long term the genetic diversity in the lake? again, there's just a lot of things we can do to make an overall fishery healthier. Because again, if we're just doing supplemental stocking, from a hatchery down the road, then you may very well just be putting a bunch of 1 stars in there because you don't know.
Right.
Whereas it's a statistics game for us. Like,
Right.
I know statistically I'm going to put more better fish in any given body of water, and by default, those fish will produce more fish. Now, genetics is genetics, right? Genetics, it's just like in deer. It's just like, I go back to the Alabama defensive lineman. Even me, I played college football, and back then, when my wife saw me, she fell in love with me real quick because I was jacked. I was a college defensive lineman, so genetically, I was pretty good. But now I just got a glorified dad bod because I don't eat and work out like I did in college when I was
Right.
playing
Right.
football. But genetically, I haven't changed.
Right.
I still am the same person genetically. So that's why it's still important for fisheries to have a healthy environment, to have the right forage base, to have the right habitat. Water quality is key. So genetics is really the last tool, I think, in the tool bag for all these lake and pond management companies and all these state agencies who try to improve forage, try to improve water quality, try to increase habitat. Habitat is a big push by a lot of states, right? But they're missing that you could have the greatest habitat and shove a bunch of 1 stars in that habitat, and no matter how good your habitat is, you still just got a bunch of 1-star recruits in the habitat because you
Right.
don't know if you have quality fish genetics in that lake. But now you can know. Now we can see that, man, your lake's great. Yeah, all you need is habitat. Keep the water quality good. Or, hey, man, you put a lot of habitat in here, but your fish quality's you're really heading downhill, and this is all going to be for naught if you don't change your genetic um, profile in your lake for those fish to truly perform in that environment where forage is available, habitat's available, water quality's good. That's what we're trying to get people to see is you could have everything, and if you're missing one piece of the pie, it tends to not work, right? And that one piece of pie could be anything. It could be habitat, it could be water quality, it could be forage base, or it could be genetics,
Mhm.
right? And we bring a known genetic improvement to the table. Like, we know genetically our fish are better. Scientifically, genetically, they're better. Now, how will they perform in the wild? How will they perform in the environment you put them in? You put them in a great environment, they're going to perform. And we know that because the other side of our business is for private landowners who we know that environment is, it is
Very
primed.
suitable. Prime. Yeah.
It's got great forage. It's above and beyond. And we see our fish absolutely explode in private waters. Crazy numbers that I won't talk about here because people will take one sentence that I say and
Yes.
and use it as a claim that that's not actually
Right.
what I said. But in a private environment, we see our fish do absolutely extraordinary things that nobody is seeing. And that will happen to some level in a public environment as well. But again, our goal, I think, from a public standpoint, from an overall greater good standpoint, is not to try to do what we're doing in private bodies of water. It's just to improve the fishery overall and make it sustainable, right? To have some sustainability in the quality of fish that we're catching. And I think that's what you'll start to see with this type of program.
A couple of things I want to say, and I said this at the beginning of the podcast. You weren't privy to this, but I said a lot of times we want to paint lakes with a broad brush. The same thing that will work at Lake Guntersville will work at Lake Martin. And sometimes that's not the case because, like you said, your forage base totally different at Lake Martin than it is at Lake Guntersville. Your habitat very different at Lake Guntersville than it is at Lake Martin. So if you're looking, let's say, and this is totally hypothetical, this is not in the plan as of November the 5th when we're recording this podcast. This is not in the plan for the state of Alabama. If you were looking at a body of water in the state of Alabama that you feel like a genetic stocking program would be a good case study, we're going to commit 3 to 5 years on a genetic stocking in a body of water in the state of Alabama, because you've said spotted bass you don't work with. So Does that
Mhm.
take Logan Martin? Does that take Lake Martin? Does that take, those spotted bass fisheries out of the equation and you look more, I mean, Smith Lake, huge spotted bass fishery, great water, uh, clarity, great water quality, Lake Martin the same way, but big spotted bass fisheries. So is there a body of water, if you looked at it and said, I feel like if we looked at a 3 to 5 year study, where we could prove our point that genetic stocking works
Yeah. So that's a great question, and I'm going to try to not answer it
directly?
convoluted because I'm going to answer it two ways. I'm not going to answer the initial question first, but I will in a second. Go, I because I think there's many bodies of waters that you're talking about with spotted bass that ultimately have taken control of the largemouth bass fishery, and that's not good either because that's not nature, right? And so I think you can even use an approach where, well, let's see if we can reestablish
Okay.
a better largemouth bass fishery on this body of water that used to have a great largemouth bass fishery that doesn't necessarily have it anymore. And, I've been out of the game for a little while, but, Logan Martin jumps to mind where spotted bass really kind of have taken control. And that maybe is even the case in Neely Henry but luckily Neely Henry still got a lot of really shallow water that spotted bass tend not to want to go to, and the largemouth bass will kind of thrive there. But you can take any one of those lakes and implement, a study showing can we regain a little bit of a largemouth bass establishment here.
Okay.
And if that's the case, I think that's a huge win because it's controllable and you can go back in and keep a healthy environment. Look, nothing anybody ever does will be perfect. Perfection. We'll never achieve perfection. What we're trying to achieve is the continued decline of any given body of water,
Right.
right? And then two, achieve what's the goal, right? What do you want? What does any region, whether scientists like this or not, any city of commerce, tourism area,
Right.
what do they want to achieve? What attracts there? What does the lake set up for best? What So there's so many different ways. So I think you could still do a study on a spotted bass dominated system because that system used to not be dominated by spotted bass. So that
Right.
would be really cool to see. Can we reestablish a largemouth bass population? Because, and here would be my theory with Titan bass, because we're reintroducing a fish that is, it's like survival of the fittest type fish. I mean, I've got rid of all the little guys that probably aren't going to do very well anyways, and I've put a bunch of 5-star recruits in this lake. So by default, their survival rate, the performance rate, the change rate is probably going to be accelerated, right? Because
Mhm.
if all I've put in there is 5 stars, well, their kids are going to be maybe 4 stars, if or 3. You know what I'm saying? It's
Mhm.
you keep, and so you're going to see results faster because you eliminated putting fish in there that wouldn't necessarily change the scale, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that would be really cool to see. Like, man, we established a largemouth bass population in this region of the lake at an astronomical rate because we used Titan bass, and the genetics really took over faster, produced better, overcame what's there quicker, and that would be cool. But from a largemouth bass standpoint, where spotted bass are not as, that would be interesting. It would be interesting to um it'd be interesting to see something like, and this is probably going to blow your
Again.
mind, but like a Wilson Lake that is 11 miles long, that has an amazing smallmouth bass fishery. But again, just like on Pickwick, Pickwick has established an amazing largemouth bass um, population alongside of a smallmouth bass population. Well, with Wilson being kind of a smaller system, maybe you can track the controllables a little bit better. Even something like, I need to go back and look, but I know one of the trails went to Wheeler this year, and the one of either um I don't know if it was Elite Series
Elite Series did.
or yeah. And I need to go back and look at the numbers, but I again, back when I started fishing the Elite Series as a co-angler, and then by default, the Alabama Bass Trail, I mean, there was some giants to be caught in Wheeler, and you just don't see or hear about that as much anymore. I think Guntersville is this is a Guntersville. One year everybody's excited, the next year everybody's complaining. So what's the real data? So the largemouth system, an isolated largemouth system would be really kind of difficult because of the infiltration of spotted bass, which again, I sit on the fence on how bad that is or how not bad that is, because they're fun to catch, but they do definitely control systems. That is no doubt that they will absolutely take control of a system. And so you may have to push south to, a system that maybe a lot of people don't think about, even like the Alabama River, or because again, the cool thing about rivers that have shallow water is it's just like, take Jordan, for example, that has New Lake, where it's connected by a canal. Like,
Yes.
yes, fish will swim down that canal, but you really could focus a lot of attention on New Lake and have some predictability of what's going on. So a lot of the river systems that have these shallow backwaters, you can kind of have somewhat of a controlled subset there, because yes, they can come and go, but we all know that a lot of fish in New Lake and on Jordan live there and
Right.
have lived there their whole lives, and they're never going to go out to the river system.
Right.
And so you can have some trackability there. Even stuff like off the beaten path stuff of like up in North Alabama, like Bear Creek or Cedar Creek, small system that great opportunity to, let's just study it. Let's see what happens. And now by default, we leave this lake way better off than it currently is.
Right.
To take that information to apply to areas like something as big as Guntersville, where you spend the better part of 3 years, pouring into Browns Creek, because of just the way we as humans have changed it.
Right.
By putting in the road across, where there's some controllables there, where
Right.
now Browns Creek is in a way its own lake, if you think about it. Yes,
yeah.
there's in and out, but there's a lot of fish in Browns Creek that will never leave Browns Creek. So stuff like that could be very interesting, where, get people to understand that sometimes it's just as good to focus on areas versus trying to fix the whole lake at one time.
Thank you.
Right?
Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you. I was
Yes.
waiting to see if you were going to say that, because a lot of times we're confronted with, Guntersville, 69,000 acres. You can't put 200 bass in there and feel like that you're making a difference. But 200 Titan bass in an area of Siebold or Browns Creek or whatever could over time make a substantial difference in that body of water. I can certainly see that at Lake Jordan with the New Lake situation, with it only being 6,600 acres to begin with. I would think that over a 3 to 5 year plan, you would certainly start seeing some differences in their genetic makeup as well.
Absolutely. I mean, again, that's practical. It's logic. And a lot of times, the scientific approach doesn't always take practice and logic into accountability, but it has, and it's, you've seen it so many times throughout the country. I mean, we all know about OHIV right now, and I mean, that is a direct correlation of what they did 10 years ago, and they stopped, but now they're like, oh, let's start doing it again. So it just, the Chickamauga is the same way. Anywhere you've seen a legitimate all-in, and it's going to take some effort. Now, that's the one thing, is people see the big number as kind of unachievable. I mean, this is, and I know you were speaking figuratively, but this is not a 200 fish approach.
Right.
But you got to realize that achieving hundreds of thousands, or even just tens of thousands, that's not hard to do. One bass produces 12,000 little eggs, right? It's like, you can, with the right effort and the right unity and resources. That's a key. Is you can quickly pull together the resources to put hundreds of thousands of fish in any given body of water, and that's hundreds of thousands of drops of red dye,
Right.
and you will see a difference. You just kind of have to look at it as, and this seems silly, but I say it all the time. People lose sight that one is 100 times more than zero.
Right.
It's one double zero. So zero, what's better than zero? Just one.
Right.
If you use 10, oh my, that's amazing.
Right.
But something is better than nothing. And the fact that the trend right now is nothing is actually the most scary part. Not that whether doing something will work or not work, like supplemental stocking. That's not as scary as the fact that right now there's some habitat efforts, I will say that, around the country and even in Alabama, but nothing is what's to fear right now. The
Right.
fact that we tend around the country to trend towards doing nothing, something is going to improve the situation.
Right.
And what's that something? And the
Yeah.
only argument we bring to the table is at least our something is trackable. It has science behind it, right?
Right.
We know that our genetic profiles are better than others, and we know that we can go back in and repeat. That's the key. Like, we can do it again and
Right.
again and
Right.
again. Like, the next time I come, I can put 5 stars in there again. And yes, maybe it takes and I'm not saying maybe. Everywhere I go is the pitch is, you got to be willing to invest in a 3 to 5 year plan. You have to. You have the one and done. That's really where people feel like their money's wasted,
Yes.
is because the one and done is very, very difficult. I mean, even like one lake jumps out at me is Toledo Bend in Texas. Their homeowners association, they spend money every year. Every year they put 50,000 every year, and you see Toledo Bend has had sustainability, and it's because there's just a constant effort. I use this analogy. I don't want to jump out of the fishing, but I own a deer feed company as well, and I help people grow big deer, and it's the same concept, but I'm bringing the nutrition side to the genetic side. And the reality is I tell people all the time, if you just do something consistently, you will see a huge change in your deer. And I prove it every time. Now, if you go all in consistently, you will see a massive change in your deer. But something consistently, you will see a change in your deer. Even in Alabama, where a lot of land is just pine trees and not a lot of nutrition, something in supplemental feeding, something consistently is way better than nothing. And the bigger the something is, the bigger the outcome will be. But we have to understand and believe in and trust that just some kind of effort in genetic infusion, or what a lot of people want to say stocking, something will improve what's going on. And the fact that we are focused on making sure that something, that whatever that's, how big or small that is quality. It's the best it can be. You're
Right.
going to see a rapid rate of return there.
Okay.
But I just think it's important that whether you believe supplemental stocking will work or not, nothing is not going to get us anywhere.
Right.
And we tend to default to nothing. And hopefully we can help change that through our, like we talked about, our genetic testing, where we can kind of see what's going on before we ever implement a plan. But in my opinion, back to your original question, it's just been proven too many times that you can change a lake with strategic supplemental stocking. And I just believe if you're consistently doing something, that you will overall see an improvement.
One of the arguments that we're faced with, and I'll let you go after this question because I know you've got work to do. One of the arguments that we are faced with each year is billions are created through a spawn. Billions of fry, billions of bass are created each year through the spawn. How can a $100,000 or 100,000 fish supplement help if we're already creating billions of fry? So that's one of the arguments, and I'll let you answer that.
Yeah. So again, I'm not a biologist, but of those billions. So what people don't realize is in a spawn, if 1% of the spawn survives, your lake is not only sustainable but increasing 1%.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
people gotta realize that most of those fish of the spawn will die. So part of the billions are the egg, the eggs of the fry. They never get to a more sustainable size for survival. So already, 98% of those billions they're talking about are being consumed by bad weather, destroyed by the bluegill population or the forage population, are being consumed rapidly. They're being eaten by other fish, other bass, and a very, 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 very small percentage of those billions they speak of actually become your next year's yearling class.
Hmm.
So the fact that we can control when we put fish into the lake, it increases size and time. Well, and we won't go into this today. Maybe this is another podcast discussion, but part of the reason why we spawn fish in the fall is so that we can introduce an advanced size fish in the spring that is our genetics, and the first thing they're going to do is eat up every old genetic they can get their hands on. But
Hmm.
they're going to be less likely to get eaten because they're advanced size. The predator, the bigger the fish, the predator goes down. So and it's a huge difference between a fry and a 2-inch fingerling. A
Yes.
fry survival rate is drastically lower than a 2-inch, and a 4-inch fish is drastically higher than a 2-inch. And as the fish gets bigger and bigger, the survival rate increases, but obviously the cost increases too.
Right.
So my answer to that is make sure you comparing apples to apples and understanding that billions of fish in a lake are hatched every year, but man, they're almost instantly consumed.
Okay.
And again, the fact that our lakes tend to be overpopulated year in and year out, that is by the result of a 1% survival rate.
Right.
So if we control when we stock a lake and at what size we stock that fish, your survivability increases. And if that fish survives, then again, it's throwing its genetics off the next time it spawns.
Right. Well, I wanted to see how you responded to that question. That is one that I'm hit with over and over and over, whether I'm talking to agency people or biologists or tourism people from other states that have been banging their fist on the counter trying to get something done in their area, because tourism and fishing go hand in hand. We've seen with the state of Alabama, just the Alabama Bass Trail's $103 million economic impact over the last 11 years. It is a viable tourism mechanism for bringing people into our state and creating economic impact. So we want to continue to do that, but we want to be good stewards of our lakes as well. You've got kids wanting to come up and fish. One day maybe I'll have grandkids that'll want to come up and fish. I'm not in a hurry for that. So don't get me wrong, I'm not in a hurry for
Yeah.
that. But as we see families grow, like I've seen yours grow, CJ Knight, I see Damian Willis with his daughter all the time fishing, Josh Chappell and his son, and all these kids that are coming up in the Alabama Bass Trail. We want to make sure that the lakes are here for them, but we want to do it in a nice, sustainable way. So that's why I wanted to get you on here to talk about the genetic side of things, where I think when most of us think about stocking, it's just put more and more and more and more fish in the water, and our catch rates will be better. We've seen catch rates go up from a shad kill at Guntersville back in 2018. We had 38 bags over over 20 pounds, and things like that do affect catch rates. Shad kills, low water, high water, current, all of those things affect catch rates. But I think the genetic part of it is where we look at a huge sustainability in Alabama fisheries. So I'm glad you were wanting to
Yeah.
come on and talk to me. Is there anything else that people should know? I will ask this because this is another question that we're talked about all the time. Guntersville, 69,000 acres. From a standpoint, and I'm sure you probably have to do some research to be able to answer this question, but from a standpoint of what amount of genetic infusion would you say a lake like that would need for us to be able to see in 3 to 5 years an impact on that body of water?
Yeah, that is a very difficult question to answer, and I've actually been studying that since I've taken this job. And I think a lot of people have studied it. And I always revert back to, I think this is the most powerful answer I can give at this point in the journey is, and I've kind of said it already, is let's change our thought process from how much to how can we do something consistently. So how can we generate the resources and pool the resources and identify the funds to help us do something consistently? So is it 50,000 fingerlings consistently every year for the next 10 years? Is it 100,000? Is it 500,000? Whatever it is that we can figure out from a resource standpoint, we just need to do it consistently. Don't have the, what I call the Amazon fix, right? I want something and I'll have it tomorrow morning.
Right.
That's not like, don't think we're going to, and especially we've worked with some small organizations that they busted their tail to raise some money and they bought some fish and that's all they had. They
Right.
bought some fish, we put it in, but they weren't able to raise any more money. They have and to me, that is actually the biggest waste of anything is a plan that doesn't have consistency, that doesn't have some longevity to it, whatever it is, right? If I can only do 100,000, but I can do 100,000 for the next 10 years, you're going to see greater impact than doing 100,000 fish one time.
Right.
But if you look at data across the board and in states that are kind of pro supplemental stocking, which we don't even use that term anymore. And my biggest suggestion to any organization, chamber of commerce, anybody out there who's fighting to get something done from a state level is stop using supplemental stocking terminology. Start focusing on genetic infusion, because that is what you can't argue it. A state agency cannot argue the fact that introducing new, better genetics, and what I mean by better is the profile is a healthier profile. You can't say that it won't make a difference. And so stop using supplemental stocking because it's a dirty word to state agencies, it seems like, and start using the improvement of genetics in our lakes. And for me, I've gotten deeper along in the conversations with agencies when I got them to think about it from a genetic infusion standpoint versus, hey, and you need to put 250,000 fingerlings in this lake for the next X years. But if you really want people to think about numbers and you look across the country and agencies who are bought into it, they are putting in any sizable body of water 150 to 300,000 fingerlings, so 2-inch fish in a system annually. And the ones who do that consistently are seeing changes. And you can't, when you look at the data, you can't argue that. You can't, and you can track the data from the stocking, because, a lot of people, generically, a lot of times the data shows that in a natural environment where the natural fish, a fish will grow about 1 pound a year. We think our fish are going to ultimately prove that wrong, but only time will tell. But you can go back and look at, you can go back when this whole thing with OH Ivy started about 3 years ago. You go back and look at 10 years prior, they started putting about 300,000 fish in that lake a year. And they did it for, I think, 4 or 5 years, and then they stopped. But I think when that first year class of fish started getting caught, they started doing it again, and they've been doing it ever since. And so I think it's proven that just doing something consistently is ultimately going to get you to where you want to be over time. And what does that look like? What does it look like? But I think if any given agency, if any given organization could have the mindset, like I'll go back and use Toledo Bend, for example, the homeowners agency there. I think they put 50,000 fingerlings in that lake every year. So that's a lot, but that's not a lot. But they've done it consistently over and over again. And I just believe there's not really a lot of else going on there. So you think about that the long-term health of Toledo Bend, they have to be impacting it at some level, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a generic run-of-the-mill fish. I won't even go into details what fish that is, but it's not special, right?
Yeah.
It's not. And so I definitely think you got to have a vision of, 6-figure type fingerlings consistently, just because these bodies of water are massive, and you will not have 100% survival rate. That's what people got to understand. You're playing statistics game here. Is, well, you're gonna put another 200,000 fish in there, and the lake's already got a bunch of little fish in it. Well, all those fish are not going to survive. You got to play the numbers game. But again, you can control, and if you can muster up the resources to buy bigger fish, that's the win. The win is finding the resource to buy, bigger fish. But
Hmm.
it's hard to get bigger fish, and so historically, the 2-inch fish is the best way to tackle the large body of waters, because it's easy to get your hands on a lot of 2-inch fish. It's hard to get your hands on tens of thousands of bigger fish, just because of what it takes to get them there in a farm environment. Um, but I think you're looking at definitely 6-figure numbers, fingerlings, on a lake like Guntersville. I personally
I think I lost Stephen right there. We're going to try to get him back on here so he can finish that thought. This is really good content. So y'all stay tuned. I'm going to try to get him back in here. All right, we got him back. So he's going to get to finish his comments about how many fish that he would say on a large body of water like Lake Guntersville, which is 69,000 acres. All right. I was like
Yeah,
sitting on the edge
sorry
of my
about that.
seat,
So
Stephen. I was like sitting on the edge of my seat, and then you like went away, and I was like, no, I wanted to hear that.
absolutely. So can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good.
So so finishing what I was saying is I definitely think on 60,000 acres, you got to have a probably a 6-figure fingerling approach over multiple years. And I personally would I would focus on sections of the lake. I would be okay with, hey, and let's just use Guntersville because we all know it and love it. Everybody can associate it with some of the names of Seabolt and Browns Creek and North and South Saudi. Is just pick some areas, pick the state park, some of the backwater that the classic was one out of years ago by Randy Howell, because I promise you that area has absolutely probably gotten just demolished over the years, kind of like Beeswax did when Kevin Van Dam won the classic on Lay Lake. I don't even know if you can catch a fish in the place where he won the classic, and so areas like that's like, let's bring those areas back by just focusing on that. So being willing to not necessarily fish, improve the whole lake at once, um, will help it be more tangible to people. Not that
Right.
it's going to work better or not. You could address the whole um, lake at once, but if people are wanting to maybe see return quicker, tangibly see return, you probably want to isolate your efforts so that people can begin to see it versus just try to attack the whole lake at once. Unless the resources are there, unless the agencies come together, state comes together, private sector come together, and we're like, hey, we're all in right here. But that's probably never going to happen, considering we're trying to improve for us, Alabama Bass Trail. We're trying to improve a lot of fisheries, and
Right.
so what is our collective efforts for sustainability, improvement through just consistent effort? But I will say, and I said it a minute ago, what I am most concerned about is the nothing effect. Like, some we got to do something.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying what I'm about to say because I work for Titan Bass, but it's the reason I work for Titan Bass, because I believe in it so much that I'm willing to go put my neck on the line and really, put my face out there, saying that the genetic infusion approach with Titan Bass, in my opinion, is currently the most it's the smartest next step to doing something, because it's controllable, because we know what's going on, we know what we're putting into the lake, we know that that population of fish statistically, genetically, are more advanced calculatably, if that's a word, calculatably, we know they're more advanced. Now, not to say that any other stocking or any other infusion wouldn't have some in there, but we know the controllable behind it. We know that we just gave you a bunch of really good apples. And then we also know that we can repeat it. And
Right.
again, the fact that we're able to repeat, we're able to track, we're able to understand. That's why I think that this effort, the genetic effort, is our next best effort, because we can kind of watch what's going on and understand what's going on versus, hey, buy as many small fish as you can and put them in there as often as you can.
Right.
Think that's where you're going to see the biggest difference. But I still believe, and again, there's no right answer here yet. I still believe it's going to be a six-figure fingerling type, hundreds of thousands type. But those can be readily available and achievable from a resource standpoint.
Awesome. Awesome. Stephen Wisdom with Red Hills Fishery, titanbass.com. That's where you can find out all the information. A lot of the people that they're working with, a lot of their information is found on titanbass.com. I did some reading there. It's really cool. I've watched some of the stuff that you've sent me over, Stephen, and man, it gets me excited. I hope that we can work with some of our partners as well as some of our local and state agencies to narrow down a body of water or multiple bodies of water that we can get started on. It's exciting to see what Arkansas is doing. As hard as that is to say, I certainly don't want Arkansas to outwork Alabama. So we'll have to get in gear. That's for sure. Thank you so much. Give your family my best and post those pictures on Facebook so I can keep up with you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on. We really enjoyed sharing our thoughts and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Sure enough. I have a feeling we're going to have people want more and more of your wisdom from Titan Bass. So thank you so much, Stephen. Great to see you.
All right. Thank you.
All right, guys, what a segment. I told you that this guy has it all. He has all the information, and I'm excited to go and share some of that in Montgomery when I travel down there later on this week. We'll be back on the Alabama Bass Trail podcast in just a minute to wrap this thing up. Y'all stay tuned.
Big banks only care about one thing: ROI. So when it comes to your small business, you can expect a big no. At AmFirst, we don't just invest in your business, we invest in you and your goals. With great rates on loans, lines of credit to help you grow, and business checking accounts. Because at AmFirst, business is personal.
Welcome back to the Alabama Bass Trail podcast presented by Phoenix Boats. And wow, that was a lot of information. I absolutely love having conversations with Stephen. He is 100% pro Alabama Lakes. We've talked about this for 3 or 4 years now, and to see the growth in the genetic testing that they're doing there at Red Hills, and to see Stephen's excitement about it. And I've talked with him about the Arkansas project for a long time. To see what they're doing is very exciting, and to see the possibilities from it. But the main thing I wanted our audience to get from that is the difference in supplemental stocking, select stocking, and genetic stocking. Supplemental stocking from a day-to-day use is not really effective unless you have a catastrophic event, meaning you've had to drain the lake or something like you're starting from scratch and you have to put fish in. Supplemental stocking just to catch more bass and to catch hundreds of bass a day instead of 20 bass a day, if that's what you're looking for. But I think what most anglers in the state of Alabama are looking for is to catch that trophy bass. And the way to do that is to have the genetics in line and those genetic markers in line that grow those trophy bass. Stocking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of F1s, as we've seen done over the past, you get 6, 7 years later and they begin to breed with each other, and it does delineate the genetics in that fish, and it does affect the vigor and the growth markers in those fish. And I think sometimes maybe that's what we're now seeing is the outcome from what we've done in years past. So it's not blaming anybody. It's just what happens in the natural breeding process of bass or cows or deer or whatever that you're talking about. So love having Stephen on. Hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation. Again, if you have questions or comments, please make sure that you post those in the comments section of our different social media. You can inbox me at k@alabamabasstrail.org. That's KAY@alabamabasstrail.org. Happy to make a list of those questions, have Stephen back on, let him address those. But everything we talked about is just on the fly today. I didn't give him any precursor questions, gave him everything as we went through this conversation, and you heard his responses. So I do want to thank Stephen Wisdom from Red Hills Fishery, TitanBass.com, for being on with us today. Again, a former Opens angler, a former Alabama Bass Trail North and South angler. He knows these lakes. He knows lakes from around the country. This is not something that he just goes to work and talks about. He's actually lived it and fished it. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to have him on as well. I do want to remind you, we are 19 days away as you're listening to this from ABT 100 payments being due December the 1st, 2024. By close of business, hopefully 6 p.m., we'll have all of those payments in. We'll know who our field is going to be for the 2025 season. And then also you are 38 days away from your Alabama Bass Trail payments, December the 20th, 2024. I've mentioned this several times. It is earlier this year than it has been in years past. Please make sure that you get those in December 20th, 2024. Don't make me sit here and have to text you over and over and over about your payments. We will text you, we will email you, we will give you a 24-hour notice. If not, we will move on to the next person on the waiting list to fill your spot. Again, all deposits are non-refundable, so we will not be refunding deposits on either of the series. We will give you a 24-hour notice. You will get emails and text messages from us reminding you, so please make sure that you do that. All right, we are just about 3 weeks away from the Bass Team Championship. That has been moved to Kentucky Lake up in Paris, Tennessee. We have 18 teams going from the Bass, from the Alabama Bass Trail, moving on to that event. We do have one change in that. That is in the North Division. Josh Butts and Stephen McAvoy unable to fish that event. Josh's wife is an employee of BASS, and which makes him off limits or unavailable to fish that event. So we have replaced the team of Josh Butts and Stephen McAvoy with Mark Condren and Ted Paisley, the next team on the list in the North Division. So we do have 18 teams traveling up to Paris, Tennessee to participate in the Bass Team Championship for a chance to go to the Bassmaster Classic. So that starts, I think, December the 4th, 5th, 6th, something like that. So we'll talk more about that as we move forward to that event. To get closer to it, we'll interview some of the teams and get their opinions on the move. I know they were excited to hear that it was moved because they were going to get no practice on the Ouachita River because it's closed by the Corps of Engineers. But I do want to thank everybody for tuning in. I hope that Stephen was able to answer some of your questions regarding stocking and how that does affect fisheries. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a great day. As Big Daddy would always say, get outdoors. Y'all have a great one.
Thanks for listening to the Alabama Bass Trail Podcast. To learn more about the Alabama Bass Trail, make sure and visit alabamabasstrail.org.